Not surprisingly, the local crime bosses hadn't been too thrilled about this development, especially the Asians who controlled the cocaine and heroin trade. A Chinese drug overlord named Zhang Anlo had executed 2 Italian mob emissaries a week before. Not a good move, and reportedly the New York mob had dispatched a top hitman, or possibly a hit team, to deal with Zhang. I'd learned that much during an hour-long morning briefing at police headquarters. Now, John Sampson and I drove to Zhang Anlo's place of business, a duplex row house on the corner of 18th and M Streets in Northeast. We were one of 2 teams of detectives assigned to the morning surveillance, which we dubbed Operation Scumwatch. We had parked between 19th and 20th and begun our surveillance. Zhang Anlo's row house was faded, peeling yellow, and looked decrepit from the outside. The dirt yard was littered with trash that looked as if it had burst from a piñata. Most of the windows were covered with plywood or tin. Yet Zhang Anlo was a big deal in the drug trade. The day was already turning warm, and a lot of neighborhood people were out walking or congregating on stoops. "Zhang's crew is into what? Ecstasy? Heroin?" Sampson asked. "Throw in some PCP. Distribution runs up and down the East Coast, D.C., Philly, Atlanta, New York. It's been a profitable operation, which is why the Italians want in. What do you think of Louis French's appointment at the Bureau?" "Don't know the man. He got appointed, though, so he must be wrong for the job." I laughed at the truth in Sampson's humor. Then we hunkered down and waited for a team of mafia hitters to show up and try to take out Zhang Anlo. That was, if our information was accurate. "We know anything about the hitman?" Sampson asked. "Supposed to be an Irish guy," I said, and looked over at John for a reaction. Sampson's eyebrows arched. Then he turned my way. "Working for the mafia? How'd that happen?" "Guy's supposed to be good. And crazy, too. They call him the Butcher." Meanwhile, an old, bowed-down guy had begun to cross M Street with deliberate glances left and right. He was slowly dragging on a cigarette. He crossed paths with a skinny white guy who had an aluminum cane cuffed at the elbow. The 2 stragglers nodded solemn hellos in the middle of the street. "Couple of characters there," Sampson said, and smiled. "That'll be us someday. Maybe, if we're lucky." And then Zhang Anlo chose to make his first appearance of the day. Chapter 10. Zhang was tall and looked almost emaciated. He had a scraggly black goatee that hung a good 6 inches below his chinny chin. The drug lord had a reputation for being shrewd, competitive, and vicious, often unnecessarily so, as if this was all a big, dangerous game to him. He'd grown up on the streets of Shanghai, then moved to Hong Kong, then Baghdad, and finally to Washington, where he ruled several neighborhoods like a New World Chinese warlord. My eyes shifted around M Street, searching for signs of trouble. Zhang's 2 bodyguards seemed on the alert, and I wondered if he'd been warned, and if so, by whom? Someone on his payroll in the police department? It was definitely possible. I was also wondering how good this Irish killer was. "Bodyguards spot us yet?" Sampson said. "I expect they have, John. We're here as a deterrent more than anything else." "Hitman spot us too?" "If he's here, if he's any good. If there is a hitman, he's probably seen us too." When Zhang Anlo was about halfway to a shiny black Mercedes parked on the street, another car, a Buick LeSabre, turned onto M. It accelerated, the engine roaring, tires squealing as they burned against the pavement. Zhang's bodyguard spun around toward the speeding car. They both had their guns out. Sampson and I shoved open the side doors of our car. "Deterrent my ass," he grumbled. Zhang hesitated, but only for an instant. Then he took long, gangly strides, almost as if he was trying to run wearing a full-length skirt, heading back toward the row house he'd just come out of. He would have correctly figured he'd still be in danger if he kept going and reached the Mercedes. Everybody had it wrong, though. Zhang, the bodyguards, Sampson and I. The shots came from behind the drug dealer, from the opposite direction on the street. 3 loud cracks from a long gun. Zhang went down and stayed there on the sidewalk, not moving at all. Blood poured from the side of his head as if there were a spout there. I doubted he was alive. I spun around and looked toward the rooftop of a brownstone, connected to more roofs, lining the other side of M. I saw a blond man, and he did the strangest thing. He bowed in our direction. I couldn't believe what he'd just done. Taken a bow? Then he ducked behind a brick parapet and completely disappeared from sight. Samson and I sprinted across M and entered the building. We raced upstairs 4 flights in a hurry. When we got to the roof, the shooter was gone. No one in sight anywhere. Had it been the Irish hitter? The butcher? The mob hitman sent from New York? Who the hell else could it have been? I still couldn't believe what I'd seen. Not just that he'd gotten Zhang low so easily, but that he'd taken a bow after his performance. Chapter 11.
The butcher found it easy to blend in with the hot-shit college students on the campus of George Washington University. He was dressed in jeans and a gray rumpled tee that said Athletic Department, and he carried around a beat-up Isaac Asimov novel. He spent the morning reading Foundation on various benches, checking out the co-eds, but mostly tracking Marianne. Okay, he was a little obsessive, least of his problems. He did like the girl, and had been watching her for 24 hours now, which was how she came to break his heart. She'd gone and shot her mouth off. He knew it for sure because he'd heard her talking to her best friend Cindy about a counselor she'd spoken to a few days before. Then she'd gone back for a second counseling session, against his explicit order and warning. Mistake, Marianne? After her noon class in hoity-toity 18th century British literature, Marianne left the campus, and he followed her in a group of at least 20 students. He could tell right away that she was headed to her apartment. Good deal. Maybe she was done for the day, or maybe she had a long break between classes. Didn't matter either way. She'd broken the rules, and she had to be dealt with. Once he knew where she was going, he decided to beat her there. As a senior, she was allowed to live off campus, and she shared a small 2-bedroom off 39th Street on Davis with young Cindy. The place was a 4th-floor walk-up, and he had no trouble getting inside. The front door had a key lock. What a joke that was. He decided to get comfortable while he waited, so he stripped down, took off his shoes and all his clothes. Truth was, he didn't want to get blood on his duds. Then he waited for the girl, read some more of his book, hung out. As soon as Marianne walked inside her bedroom, the butcher wrapped both arms around her and placed the scalpel under her chin. Hello, Marianne, he whispered. Didn't I tell you not to talk? I didn't tell anyone, she said. Please. You're lying. I told you what was going to happen. Hell, I even showed you. I didn't tell. I promise. I made a promise too, Marianne. Made it on my mother's eyes. Suddenly he sliced left to right across the college girl's throat. Then he cut her again, going the other way. While she writhed on the floor, choking to death, he took some photos. Prize winners, no doubt about it. He didn't ever want to forget. Marianne.
Chapter 12.
The next night, the butcher was still in D.C. He knew exactly what Jimmy Hatz was thinking, but Jimmy was too much of a coward and a survivor to ask. Do you have any idea what the hell you're doing now? Or why we're still in Washington? Well, as a matter of fact, he did. He was driving a stolen Chevy Caprice with tinted windows through the section of D.C. known as Southeast, searching out a particular house, getting ready to kill again. And it was all because of Marianne, and her big mouth. He had the address in his head and figured he was getting close now. He had one more hit to take care of. Then he and Jimmy could finally blow out of Washington. Case closed.
"Streets around here remind me of back home,"
Jimmy Hatch piped up from the passenger seat. He was trying to sound casual and unconcerned about their hanging around D.C. so long after the shooting of the Chinaman.
"Why is that?"
asked the butcher, his tongue planted firmly in his cheek. He knew what Jimmy was going to say. He almost always did. Truth be told, Jimmy Hatz's predictability was a comfort to him most of the time.
"Everything's falling to shit, right before our eyes, just like in Brooklyn. And there's your reason why. See the shines hanging out on every other street corner? Who the hell else is going to live here? Live like that?"
Michael Sullivan smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Hatz could be moronic and irritating at times. Politicians wanted to, they could fix this whole mess. Wouldn't be so hard, Jimmy.
"Oh, Mikey, you're such a bleeding heart. Maybe you should run for political office."
Jimmy Hatch shook his head and turned to face the side window. He knew not to push it too far.
"And you're not wondering what the hell we're doing here? You're not thinking that I'm crazier than the last of the Coney Island shithouse rats? Maybe you want to jump out of the car, head over to Union Station, hop a train back to New York, Jimmy, my boy."
The butcher was smiling when he said it, so Hatch knew it was probably okay for him to laugh, too. Probably. But in the past year, he'd seen Sullivan kill two of their friends, one with a baseball bat, one with a plumber's wrench. You had to be careful at all times.
"So what are we doing here?" Hatch asked, "since we should be back in New York."
The butcher shrugged.
"I'm looking for a cop's house."
Hatch shut his eyes.
"Oh, gee, it's not a cop. Why a cop?"
Then he pulled his fedora down over his face.
"See no evil,"
he muttered. The butcher shrugged, but he was amused.
"Just trust me. Did I ever let you down? Did I ever go too far over the top?"
They both started to laugh at that one. Did Michael Sullivan ever go too far over the top? Did he ever not go too far over the top was the better question. It took another 20 minutes to find the house he was looking for. It was a 2-story A-frame, looked as if it had been painted recently, flowers in the window boxes.
"Cop lives here? Not too bad a place, actually. He fixed it up okay." "Yeah, Jimmy, but I'm tempted to waltz in and create a little havoc. Maybe use my saw, take some photographs."
Hatch winced.
"Isn't that such a good idea? Really, I'm being serious here."
The butcher shrugged.
"I know you are. I can see that, James. I feel the heat from your brain working overtime." "Cop have a name?" asked Hatch. "Not that it matters."
"Not that it matters," Sullivan said.
"Cop's name is Alex Cross."
Chapter 13.
The butcher parked a block or so up 4th Street. Then he got out of the car and walked quickly back toward the cozy house where the cop had the bottom floor flat. Getting the correct address had been easy enough for him. The mafia had ties with the bureau, after all. He loped around the side, trying not to be seen, but not concerned if he was. People in these neighborhoods didn't talk about what they saw. This job was going to happen fast now. In and out of the house in a few seconds, then back to Brooklyn to celebrate his latest hit and get paid for it. He stepped through a thick patch of pachysandra surrounding the back porch, then boosted himself up. He walked right in through the kitchen door, which whined like a hurt animal. No problem so far. He was inside the place easy enough. He figured the rest would be a snap, too. Nobody in the kitchen. Nobody home. Then he heard a baby crying and took out his Luger. He fingered the scalpel in his left-hand pocket. This was a promising development. Babies in the house made everybody careless. He'd killed guys like this before, in Brooklyn and in Queens. One mob stoolie he'd